Awesome. Thank you so much for that great introduction. As Cassie mentioned, thank you all again for being here for this great alumni program. My name is Sora Kim, and I'll be moderating the conversation today with our assistant moderator, April, and chat moderator, Takaya. So, would you like to quickly introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm April. I'm a third year studying journalism, English, and Asian American studies. Super excited to be part of this panel and moderate it.
Hi everybody, I'm Michaela Gunn. I'm a second year studying psychology, learning organizational change and global health. And I like these spaces, so I'm excited to be a part of it.
Yep. So I'm also a second year studying psychology and economics, and really great to moderate this chat today. So now, without further ado, we have a great lineup of alumni speakers to share their insights with the group today. Once we hear from them for about 40 or so minutes, we will take questions from the audience. If you want to turn your mic on to ask your question, please submit your question via the public chat tab and we will call on you. If you'd like to read the question out to your panelists, then send a chat to our assistant moderator, April, via private chat. Without further ado, let's get started with the introductions of our amazing panelists.
You want me to start? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. I'm Pilar Queen. I live in New York. I'm from New York. I graduated from Northwestern in 2003. I was in the School of Communication, which I know has had a name change. So I won't try to say what it is because I'll bungle it. And I was a theater and English major. And I currently work as a book publishing agent in the publishing department at UTA. I've been here for 4 years, but I've been working as a literary agent for 20. So it's me.
Hi everyone, I'm Priyanka. I live in India. I graduated in 2007 with a major in economics, international studies, and a minor in business institutions. I'm very excited to be here. I run a publishing house for children's books, and I am also an author of children's books, and I specifically write for 0 to 6 years old.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sam Rame. I was an English major and a jazz studies minor. I graduated in 2012. I'm currently a senior editor at the Vera Institute of Justice, which is a nonprofit in Brooklyn that works on justice reform and ending mass incarceration. But prior to that, I was a book editor for 10 years at Penguin Random House in Hachette, where I worked on everything from literary fiction to movie tie-ins to mostly, by the end, narrative nonfiction. So excited to talk to you all today.
Awesome. Thank you for those amazing introductions. And I'm sure all the students are excited to see you guys. So now we have prepared some questions for you and would love to hear some more about your background. So can you share with us some of the impactful classes or experiences for you in undergrad that led you to pursue your current career path? Do you want to start first, Sam?
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, I guess being an English major was incredibly influential towards my ending up working in book publishing. I think I found pretty quickly in my first semester at Northwestern that being an English major was basically like being in the world's most expensive book club, and that was thrilling and exciting. And I thought, boy, if I could find a way to do this for my career, that would be great. And I did. I think every English major at some point or another thinks maybe I should work in book publishing because it's the most, sort of natural thing that you can do with the degree. And you certainly can. So I think, yeah, being an English major in general, and I think that I think in terms of specific classes or anything, I think book publishing is an industry that sort of rewards well-rounded people, and you kind of never know, what might inform your work. You might kind of think that being a jazz studies minor would have nothing to do with your career, and then you're sitting in an editorial meeting and somebody says, I have a book proposal on John Coltrane, does anybody know anything about this? And you're like, yeah, I'm the guy for you. So I think particularly English classes, but also just sort of a broader arts and sciences education does really help in that way.
For sure. I think book publishing is a really, really interesting Thank you, though. And I saw Priyanka, you unmuted yourself. So go ahead, whatever you have to add there.
So I think my major set me up for a career in entrepreneurship. In fact, I founded a business while I was at Northwestern, and then we sold it to our juniors in our senior year. So I think I was just plugged to actually start a publishing house. But the interesting thing is that I actually started collecting children's books while I was at Northwestern. I think, like he said, it for me, being at Northwestern was being part of a big book club where everyone came with different ideologies, different thought processes, different areas of expertise. And suddenly we were reading like this whole wider range of things. And I discovered my love for children's books through these very people that I met at Northwestern. I graduated with a chest of 100 children's books that I actually ended up using to train people in, to use in the people side of any business that I worked in. I use it to induct people, use them to teach them new skills, get our teams to be built together. And I think that's where it sort of set me up eventually to set up a children's publishing house. So you don't know where you're going to start and where you're going to end up, but somehow that experience adds up.
I totally agree. And I think those book clubs and like children books, I think they're amazing. And I saw Pilar, you unmuted too, so please go ahead.
I was just going to say, I was an English major, as I mentioned, but I studied a lot of Russian literature, which has zero to do with what I do today. But I knew very, very early on in my life what I wanted to do. Luckily, it was happenstance. It was a Northwestern connection, somebody who had graduated, had been in the same sorority that I was in I was only in a sorority for a year, but anyway, it was a Northwestern connection that got me my first job in book publishing. So I am incredibly grateful, and the two feel very connected. But in terms of the actual education, for me, I just wanted to soak up everything I possibly could when I was in college, with the knowledge that, with a couple of exceptions, medical school, even perhaps going into business and studying economics, that I could learn, whatever was being offered, and my career perhaps would have nothing to do with it. So I also feel like I was a theater major, and I also knew I never was going to be an actor. So I was there for absorption and not trying to lean it towards my career.
Of course. And I agree with you as well, because I'm also in a sorority, and I think those connections, that community you build is very valuable, and that can like even get you your first job maybe. So I think that is a great part of community to join. And also I agree with you that like in college, its most important thing is like just experiencing, exploring all the different subjects and knowledge, so that can help you like further on your career. And yeah, so going off of that, I was also curious, since you've mentioned like clubs and other parts outside of majors and minors, can you share more about like some classes outside of your major or minor and that impacted your path? Like since Claire, you mentioned like you were a theater major, so maybe some of those classes could have like impacted your career in any way.
Sure. So as I mentioned, I think, and probably within the first week of my tenure at Northwestern, I realized that I was not going to be a professional actor, but I wasn't going to abandon the major, because I don't know if anybody on this Zoom is in the theater program there. But I also knew that no matter what career I chose, I was going to have to present myself in front of people all the time and, put my best foot forward. And having that sort of confidence coming from a degree in theater was going to be valuable no matter what I did. That being said, doing a double major means that most of the classes, with the exception of statistics, which I still remember with horror, fell into the category of theater and English. So I really spent so much of my time in those two departments, and there were a lot of opportunities for me to take classes outside of that because there were so many requirements for those double majors. I don't know if the other panelists had a similar experience, because I know you both also had, I think, double majors, or maybe it was a minor. But anyway, so I didn't take a lot outside of that. But obviously, I think they were both really important in shaping who I am, if not where I am in my career.
I took a lot of classes outside my majors. I did everything from filmmaking 101 to CIA and the Third World, to art classes. There was a trading class, which I basically flunked. I think like they gave us a set of fake money and I lost all of it on day 2 because clearly I was really good at finance. And then I remember everybody made fun of me. And by the end of that, I had made the most money. So I think some of the things that you learn from these other classes are the softer skills. Like it doesn't matter if you fail, you just have to learn very quickly and then, get ahead of the game. I think CIA in the third world was actually taught by an ex-CIA agent. And I think we were only like 6 or 8 kids in that class. And it was amazing. It was like actually a, one-on-one lesson in storytelling because he was actually sharing his life in a way where I remember almost every single thing that he taught us in that class. Filmmaking 101, I think it just set me up for wanting to make, get into production one day, which if I've got to publishing, I'm sure I'll get to production soon. So I think like I was one of those people who just like sort of try to finish all the requirements for her majors really quickly. So I had like a whole year extra to take all these extra classes. And I also met like a wider range of people because of it. And they're some of my closest friends. And, there were people who were doing math majors, they were theater majors, they were in the journalism school, law school. So it was, I met a lot of graduate students through it also. And it was fantastic. And I think it just sort of broadens your spectrum of knowledge. And so today I feel like I can sit with anyone in the world and I'll have something to say or something to ask.
Yeah, so I also was a music English dual degree that I didn't quite finish, so it ended up being a jazz studies minor. So I also really didn't take that many classes outside my major. I also my career in book publishing started out as me just sort of trying to spend a year or two talking myself out of getting an English PhD. So I was really sort of all in on English at the time. So I really didn't take that many classes outside the major. I guess I will say that the sort of like the application of the breadth of classes within the English major was sort of surprising in a lot of ways. My first job in publishing was assistant head of Penguin Classics. And, at the time I sort of wasn't that well read on kind of like commercial and modern fiction. And, I thought that was going to be a serious impediment to getting a job. And I was sort of embarrassed by it and trying to kind of give myself a crash course. And I walked into this interview and one of the first questions she asked me was, what do you know about World War I poetry? And I had taken mostly classes on modernist literature, and I got that job, and it was sort of shocking to me that I was like, oh my God, I never thought being able to recite Wilfred Owen on the spot would actually get me a job in any way, And then like a year later in that job, I was asked to edit a new edition of Gaston Bachelard's Poetics of Space, which was actually sort of like a key book in my honors thesis, which was very surprising. So, I think that sort of you kind of never know what's going to end up applying. And so I think at least studying widely within the major was helpful. I also was, in terms of sort of outside the major, I was on Helicon Literary Magazine. I have no idea if that still exists, but that was kind of the first experience I had with editing fiction and actually working directly with writers. And it kind of was the first thing that kind of gave me the confidence to sort of think, okay, I can do this and this is a lot of fun. I really enjoy working with writers to advance their work. And so that was really cool. So.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. It's really surprising how they would ask you about poetry in your first interview and then you actually like nailed it. So that's awesome. So going off of that, like, can you guys share about like maybe your first job out of undergrad and how did that impact your career path? Sam, do you want to go first since you mentioned that in your interview?
Looks like Sam is frozen, so I'm happy to
Yeah.
jump in until he comes back.
Yeah.
So my first career, as I said, it was through a Northwestern connection. I got an internship. Sorry, Sam, I'm taking your thunder because you were frozen for a second. I was just going to tell the story of my first job. So I, through this Northwestern connection, had gotten an internship the summer after my sophomore year of college. I fell in love with it. I knew that that's what I wanted to do with, at least the foreseeable future. And luckily it worked out for both of us. And they said, anytime you're home for break, please come join us here. And then we would love to have you work full time when you graduate. So 4 days after I graduated in June, I took the job, and I other than a couple of maternity leaves, have never left and done anything else. So it's been a pretty straight path, which I can't say for most people in my life or, in the world around us. Most people have a little bit more of a circuitous route to get from where they are at 22 to where they are at 42. But I've stayed on the same path, and it started, as I said, I was 19 and an intern, and continued since.
So I'm at the other end of the spectrum that took like a lovely curvy path to get where I am. My first job out of college was in consulting. I graduated in 2007. Everyone was either doing banking or consulting. So somehow you had to get lost on that path for a year or two before you found yourself again. I did that. I actually worked with Towers Perrin, which had a lot of Northwestern alumni there too. So it was sort of like moving to New York and being within, again, your folks. And I learned a lot, met some wonderful people, learned how to really build strong teams, but I think it was definitely not what I wanted to do with my life. And I think most people quit their first job after college within the first year, and I definitely fell into that statistic. But I think it set me up to understand how to build great teams, because that's what we did have at Towers, was a great team and a great culture.
So I did have a publishing internship during college. I interned at NYU Press for a summer, so I sort of knew that was something I was interested in doing. But my first job out of college actually was I was a teaching assistant in Northern France, teaching English, and I really cannot recommend doing something like that enough. Just sort of taking a year, to kind of figure things out afterwards. It was a great job. It paid really well, and I got to travel. And I could have done it for another year, and I sort of got anxious about all my friends starting careers and such. And I came back, and I, at this point, sort of really wish I hadn't, because it would have been great to spend another year there. But then I came back, and my first job in publishing was as an editorial assistant at Penguin Classics, which was a sort of, it's a kind of strange and small corner of publishing. There's really, like sort of Penguin Classics, Vintage Classics are really the kind of like biggest parts of that part of publishing. And those are really 2 or 3 person groups, all of them. But so it was kind of an unexpected place to get started in publishing. It was really great because it's a very small group, and I had to do, parts of our publicity and marketing, and I really kind of had to do everything. And it really kind of gave me a broader, sort of more comprehensive vision of publishing than I think a lot of people get. And so, and it was a great job.
And that is like really interesting to me, because I also wanted to like do teaching, and then like you said, your first job out of undergrad was like teaching in Northern France, and I think that it's like such a dream job for me. So I'm glad that you had that experience right out of college. So I think that also like follows up to my next question of like, what was your favorite job throughout your career that you are not doing currently?
Yeah, I mean, my last job in book publishing before I came to my current job was as a nonfiction editor at Hachette Books, and I worked primarily with journalists and historians and sort of other public intellectuals on their books, and I love that job. There's a lot of reasons that I left book publishing, and I have lots of good and bad things to say about it. But at the end of the day, that sort of was my dream, to work with Pulitzer Prize winning writers on their nonfiction, and it was great. I loved it, and it was sort of like a dream come true in a lot of ways, and also encouraged me to think about what I might want to do outside of publishing. So yeah.
Again, I think they've had very straightforward paths into publishing. I have had quite a journey before I got here. My 2 favorite jobs one was actually running Connect to Teach, which is ed tech that I founded a couple of years ago. The business plan for Connect to Teach was actually written in my freshman year at Northwestern. So it was amazing for me to actually be running that business almost like 12 years after I graduated, because I think education hadn't reached where I thought it would reach by 2007, but 10 years later, it did get there. And it was quite exciting to set that company up. For very, very personal reasons, I had to actually decelerate it, not because it was not growing, not because it was not doing well, but it's definitely something I miss doing, because we ended up creating a great global network and being connected to a lot of alumni across different countries that actually helped us build that company also. My second favorite job was actually working with an NGO, leading an NGO, a 3-decade-old NGO in India, which actually worked with government schools and helped upskill kids in computer technology, math skills, values, etc. And sort of growing that program pan-India. And that was, I think, something that I really enjoyed, and I realized my love for kids in that job.
Yeah, I don't have much to add since I've only had one job.
No, I totally agree. And I think these are all really great experiences, and because you have all like different kind of jobs, or like how many jobs you did in the past, like gives like students a better perspective on like how different majors can all like do like the publishing, and that gives them a lot of like different paths and insights as well. So I think it was really great like learning about how like business background, like you guys could also have a career in book publishing, and I think that gives a lot of hope because I'm also doing like economics and like business related. So I was curious, what has surprised you about what you learned or did in school that helped you in your work today that you didn't thought of? Pilar, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm thinking about it. I don't want to just throw out an answer there. I mean, I don't know if Sam or Priyanka have thoughts immediately. I don't want to speak just for the sake of speaking, and I want to give it some thought.
I can jump in. I mean, I think that this sort of like the kind of like nuts and bolts communication of writing an English paper are really sort of follow you through these careers. I mean, what you kind of learn about good writing and good communication really kind of works through. I mean, I think good editing is an art, but I also think that it's not rocket science, and particularly sort of in the kinds of narrative nonfiction I was doing, it's really about sort of presenting an argument and selling it well with great evidence and keeping the reader engaged, you know. And I think those are the kinds of things you learn, you know, working on papers in arts and sciences. So I really do think that the good fundamentals of writing and communication follow you through. And, you know, in my current job, it's really not so similar, not so dissimilar to book publishing, in the sense that I'm really just sort of helping really smart people, advocates, researchers, policymakers, you know, make and sell their arguments. And it really kind of is, you know, I was working on a New York State Assembly member's op-ed yesterday, and you know, it sort of came down to like, you need a thesis statement in this, and it seems so ridiculous that 15 years out of college you'd still be sort of telling people about thesis statements, but it really kind of, you know, good writing is good writing, and I do think it kind of it follows you through.
So I couldn't agree more. I think that for me, it was both the hard skills and the soft skills. So I think, like I mentioned, some of my closest friends till date are actually journalism students from Northwestern. And I sort of saw them go through the grill of middle, and like, you know, I tell my editor this all the time. Like, I feel like I'm married to her, because for me, her looking at my work scientifically as an editor is so important. And I don't think I could ever put a book out there without having a really good editor look at it. And I learned that value at Northwestern. I think I picked up a lot of hard skills at Northwestern, which I think that holds us to a higher, sort of like a benchmark of quality that we actually hold ourselves accountable to and hold others accountable to also. But more importantly, I think what Northwestern did for me is actually introduce me to a whole bunch of people that were like me, that wanted to actually do something that has an impact in the world. It's making a difference to somebody. It's making a change. The 3 skills that I picked up at Northwestern are the same 3 skills that we use to publish children's books at Sam and Me, which is empathy, problem solving, communication. You have to understand understand other people, use that to understand what the problem actually is, deliver a solution that actually works, and communicate it properly so you can get people behind you, whether that communication is using words, whether it is, you know, using writing, whether it's using art. I think all of that was learned at Northwestern. And I think that that side of the experience has really actually seen me through almost everything that I've done in my life after. And I think, like, you know, I think we give a lot of merit to the classes we take, but I think there should be enough merit given to the culture that has, you know, that Northwestern has created, the kind of people that it brings together to actually be in those classes with you, the kind of discussions that happen on those classes after. I think all of that also sort of percolates into who you are and how you conduct yourself in the world after. And I think that has definitely led me to where I am today and what I'm doing today.
I totally agree. Like the culture of Northwestern and as well as like the writing skills, communication skills we learn in school is going to like be very helpful no matter what in our future careers. And I definitely agree. Like here, I feel like it's very like everyone can express their own opinions. And there's so many different student organizations where you can explore your different interests and form that kind of community that will develop your network as well as like encouraging you to like be yourself and do whatever like that makes you feel like yourself. So Northwestern that definitely prepares us well in that end. I just wanted to check back in with you, Pilar, if you had anything you wanted to add. If not, it's totally fine. We can like
No,
also
I
move on.
think my co-panelists said it really well, and I'm not going to again speak for the sake of speaking here.
Awesome. Yeah, that is totally great. And would love to like move on and like ask and learn a little bit more about your careers. So how do you think your arts and sciences background play out in your work today?
I'm happy to jump in, and I'm sort of answering a question that you're not asking, which is what do I love about my job? But
No worries.
it speaks to
no
that
worries.
this piece, which is that I often get asked, why do you love your job? What do you like about it? And it's the similar experience that I had in college and being an English major. I'm learning something new every single day. There's a book, if I want to work on a book about astrology, that's possible. I can do that. If I want to work on a book about archaeology, that's possible. There are so many different curiosities that what I do every day can fulfill. And it was a similar experience being at such an incredible college where there are classes on literally absolutely everything, even within my department. And it was, to be a successful student, you have to be curious. To be a successful literary agent, you also have to be curious. And that's something that, you cultivate in an atmosphere where there's a lot of opportunity for education, and it, continues on for decades, depending on, the world that you're surrounding yourself in. So I would just say that the kind of hunger for information that I had then is also what excites me today and is the best part of my job.
I couldn't agree more. I think that I like literally I'll copy paste that answer, because I think that's what publishing is, that even when I write children's books, with constantly looking at topics, constantly looking at themes, getting into the psychology of kids, whether it's the colors that we pick, the whether it's what the book will actually look like, or the content that it has in it, or what the illustrations are going to be about. Everything has a learning curve, and I think that curiosity, what she's talking about, is exactly what we picked up and thrived on at Northwestern and during our pursuing our majors, and that's exactly what's keeping us going right now.
Yeah, I think that Pilar and Priyanka said it perfectly, and I think in addition to sort of being curious, I think an English major or science degree kind of gives you the ability to kind of jump into different situations, and when you're learning about something new and kind of hit the ground running. As an nonfiction editor, you might know nothing about Polish politics, and then all of a sudden have to take a meeting with an author who's an expert in Polish politics and have to kind of sound like what you're talking about after just sort of spending an hour reading that proposal and get into it. And it's the same thing in the work I do now. I might have later today, I might have to edit written testimony on a jails ordinance in Texas, and sort of not knowing what the legislative landscape there looks like, and be able to sort of get in right away, apply critical reading to the documents, look at how you're going to communicate those issues and sell what we're asking for and really get in there. So I think that does, that sense of sort of curiosity and critical thinking does set you up well for these jobs.
I'll just add something, when you do publishing, it's not just about writing a book. It's also about understanding that what is that you want that book to communicate to the other person, and how that book will actually go across countries, go across cultures, if you have that sort of ambition with that book. And I think that's what your art and sciences background does, is help you understand, if I want to take this book to France, how does a mother read to the child over there? What is the culture over there? What are they talking about? Does this word actually transcend boundaries and make sense over there? Does it mean something completely different? And that even that sensitivity comes from having explored a wide range of subjects, wide range of topics, and understanding that you have to ask these questions and find these answers. Sorry, I just want to
For
add that.
sure. Yeah, no, I think that is definitely very important because I'm also like taking classes in arts and sciences, like I'm taking Sufism and also like intro to Korean literature. And I think these kind of classes really help us understand the culture of like these different countries, different religions, and those are all very helpful in our like future careers when we like meet people from those countries or different places and we get to know them a little bit more better and understand what they're thinking, why they're behaving in certain ways. So then we can understand why they are like having certain kind of thoughts. So I definitely agree that arts and sciences background provides a really good fundamentals in that way for us. And going off of that, I was also curious, what do you think, like how has the pandemic impacted your career in this?
I forget. I know we were going in an order now. I've forgotten. I'll go for it. So as I'm sure you can imagine, having people stuck at home was the best thing that could have possibly happened for book publishing. You know, the entire industry across the board had record numbers. And despite the fact that people obviously weren't going into bookstores, book sales were up in huge ways. So personally and selfishly, obviously, because I know there were a lot of other pieces of the world that were really in a tough place, a dark spot. The pandemic was sort of reinvigorating to the book publishing industry. I will also say that this particular moment in time, obviously George Floyd in May of 2020, there was a real reckoning across all sorts of industries. But you know, I really think that it was profound in book publishing. And I think that there was a real concerted effort to hear diverse voices in a way that hadn't been before. So it was a sort of 1-2 punch of adrenaline that was infused into book publishing with all of, you know, everything that's happened over the past 3 years. And it's continued. I think I'm usually a pretty big cynic, but I'm long book publishing and books. I have said quite a few times that, you know, we're sort of like cockroaches. We're not dying. We're not going anywhere. And even when ChatGPT takes over the world, people will still be reading books. So I think things change and they evolve, and there's, you know, waves of downturns. But I think in general, at least back to your original question, the pandemic was an incredible moment in time for book publishing.
I'll say 3 things. One is actually, I launched the publishing house at the height of COVID. So I used to already write children's books, but I used to write them privately for my children and then sort of like, you know, give them away as a return present, maybe to someone of guests who would come to our house. And I think what happened to me during, you know, when the pandemic started was that a lot of parents, a lot of schools, a lot of learning specialists started asking for the books, and I formalized it for them. And then somehow it just, I think, like she said, like, I think that was just a trend. People just reading more, parents are spending more time with their children. They wanted good content to actually read to their children, and it sort of snowballed into something else. And now we started bringing in other authors, other writers on board to actually meet, you know, to actually do the work that we want to do with it. The second thing that I'd say is that, you know, one of the other things that we realized during the pandemic was the importance of credible knowledge. I think that became you know, something that was like, you know, just people just understood that the voices that they need to hear, everybody was talking, but like who they needed to hear to get the right care, to get the right advice, to get the right wisdom out there. And I think that's what publishing does. I think there's just such a thorough process that, I mean, look at these guys. I mean, they've just devoted their career to actually understanding how to get, you know, how to put the science into it. And I think that's what the pandemic did. It just made people aware that this is where the credible knowledge sits in publishing, you know. And I agree with her. It is. And imagine starting a publishing house in 2021. I think that you have to be really committed to seeing this through in the long term. It's not something that's been around for 100 years and we're just sort of carrying it through. I also run agriculture tech company. And for me to think that, hey, this is something that I should do means that, you know, I definitely see a future for it. I think what the pandemic, the third thing I want to say is changed our habits of how we work. And for me, that meant that a lot of great talent was suddenly now available to me because they were happy to work remotely. and which they wouldn't have been which wouldn't have been possible before. So we have a lot of people working for us across the world. And I think that's what it shifted that's what shifted for us in terms of the pandemic.
You said current job, and I'm assuming that you don't want to hear about the pandemic and criminal legal reform, but rather publishing. So I can talk to that. But I kind of will, I guess, speak to kind of like the flip side of what Pilar said. I think the pandemic was sort of a mixed bag for publishing. I think there are things that got better, and I think there are things that got worse. I mean, I think there was an incredible moment to make strides in things like, flexible working arrangements and the way workers were treated in their jobs, as well as for diversity inside these workplaces. And there was a lot of sort of progress made. And a couple of years later, I think that window started shrinking and a lot of things got rolled back. So, I don't know that those commitments were longstanding. I think, book publishing is a conservative industry full of progressive people. So, by which I mean, it's really hard to change, and people are set in the ways they do things. And so, I think it changed in some ways for the better, but in some ways, I think it sort of stayed the same. I also think that from the editorial perspective, and this is, something that I've shared with a lot of editors I've spoken to, I think it got a lot harder. Being an editor is a really hard, time-consuming job. It's basically 3 jobs in one. You're reading manuscripts, you're editing manuscripts, and you're doing all the daily work, to push those books through the publishing house. During the pandemic, I think the volume of work increased as a result of downsizing, as a result of agents sending out more manuscripts, while actually selling those books got a lot harder. I think it sort of shifted things top heavier in a lot of ways. So there are some books making a lot of money, but doing the sort of smaller books, things about kind of more niche issues, things without, authors that don't have big followings to begin with, that got a lot harder. So I think it's a hard job, and I think it's getting harder, and I don't think that means it's not worth doing. It's incredibly rewarding in a lot of ways. But I do think it was kind of a mixed bag for publishing.
Yeah, no, I think those provide a really great perspectives. Like, I agree that pandemic, more people are reading books because they're stuck at home, and no, not even ChatGPT can replace books. So there's always going to be a career in that field, but it also gets harder as time goes by. And as Priyanka mentioned, there's also more talents because people are going to work from home, and this new kind of working from home or hybrid model has appeared since pandemic. So I think all those different kind of perspective really help the student understand more about the industry nowadays. So going off of that, what advice do you have for the students for networking within your industry?
I would say be ready to spend a lot of time doing it. I don't think I quite realized when I started out being an editor of how much kind of schmoozing was involved. And, it took me, as a kind of anxious, introverted person, it took me a little while to feel comfortable walking into a party full of people I didn't know and, making 2 hours of conversation. And, it's a reality, the job. You really can't do the editor's job without doing that. And so you really kind of have to be prepared for it. In terms of jobs and networking, I would say that kind of one piece of advice I have is I think the tendency is to go towards the top and to look, say my friend's mom's former roommate is the publisher of Random House, and so I'm going to talk to her and she's going to get me a job. And I think a lot of the time you're going to have better luck when when your whatever sister's college roommate is an editorial assistant somewhere. It's often the kind of people further down the chain who know where the jobs are opening up, who kind of understand what it's actually like on the ground working in these places, who are going to be honest with you. So I would say kind of don't write people off because of where they are in their careers. A lot of the time it's the really kind of the assistants and the people lower down on the ladder who can really kind of help you get a foot in the door and understand what you need to do.
So I've not really had to look for a job in this industry, but I know that it's really hard. I think sorry, I'm on the other side where I'm looking for talent. So, but I think what has really always worked for me through my career is to actually find the right mentors in the industry. I think the minute you have somebody who's aligned with you and knows the industry well, they just sort of help take away a few of the years that you need to understand the industry. So they just sort of help you navigate it. They help you open a few doors. They help you understand how to take, steps which should have taken you 2 or 3 years. They help you do that in a year. And I think that for me, whenever I step into a new industry, that's the first thing I look for is that, who are the people who can actually help you. And people always think it's a one-way street. It isn't, because the minute they are mentoring you, they also understand that you are the person with the new ideas who's going in with a new thought process, and they also benefit in turn with that, because they actually get to hear the other side, what they haven't thought. Like you said, publishing is a slow industry, right? It's a conservative industry with progressive people. I love it. And I think that if you're somebody who's coming with a new way of doing things, they also want to hear that knowledge. So I think it's a two-way street. I also agree with what Sam said, that, when you're actually, like, even when I have to hire internally, I usually ask people who are, sort of still growing within the company, because they are the ones who actually know the network of people who are still passionate about the industry, who still want to do something different, and, who bring with them a lot of their friends and their network to join in. I'm also a super introvert, so it was really hard for me to do it myself. But what I did end up doing was creating a network around me that was actually able to do this for me and with me also. So I think that way I could actually conserve my personality a little bit. But of course, you have to go out and do a little bit of the grunt work in terms of networking. But I think that if it's in line with what you want to do, then eventually it does pay off, just getting out of your comfort zone a little bit.
I would just say the fact that you're even here is you're in a far better place than I or any of my friends were in college. So despite the fact that I knew what I wanted to do, I never took the initiative to network, to meet with career services, to talk to people in various industries. I as I often say, I wouldn't get into Northwestern today, but clearly there's a sort of an ambition and an ability to sort of take advantage of all of the resources that are offered to you that you guys are already doing. So you're in a far better position than most. And so I think just continuing to say yes to everything will open up an incredible range of opportunities.
Thank you so much for all those great answers. I think it's really important to know how networking is very important, talking to different people and giving them those ideas are very important for our students in their future careers. And now I think we want to open the floor up for our students to ask any questions they have. And I'll pass it on to April to see if any other questions that are available. Thanks.
Yes, thanks so much, Sora. And thank you so much to all of our panelists for sharing your experiences and such amazing advice. We now have time for audience questions. So if you want to turn your mic on to ask your question, you can submit your question via the public tab and we'll call on you. But if you'd like us to read the question out to our panelists, feel free to send a private chat. But in the meantime, we saw from our poll that the majority of folks on the call today are unfamiliar with publishing in general. So can you share more about your respective roles in the industry, whether as an agent, publisher, editor, and so on? And maybe we could start with Pilar.
Did you say goals? That was the question about goals?
Sorry, your roles.
Oh, roles. I'm glad I clarified.
So, as an agent.
So my, I will break it down very, very simply. My role as a literary agent is I represent authors and help them shepherd their careers and sell their books to publishing houses. It's not as transactional as a real estate agent. We are more like a combination of a therapist and a life coach. And we oversee the entire process from the moment somebody should be writing a book, has an idea, to long after the book is published and thinking about what the next one is. Specifically because I work at a big talent agency, we are often partnering with the talent represented by other parts of the agency, whether it's musicians or actors or journalists or influencers, and helping them with the book side. So that can be everything from they have an idea, we help it make it happen, or we represent somebody who should be doing a book and we convince them that it's worth their time. So that's basically what I do.
So I run a publishing house for children's books. What that involves, as I also write for children's books, so it involves me publishing my own books and bringing in other authors. We usually write children's book based on 3 themes that I mentioned: empathy, problem solving, and communication. So if we find, we actually, we don't take submissions. We actually look out for people who we think have a very unique story or a unique way of thinking, and we commission them to write the work for us. We have our in-house illustrators who actually help illustrate the work. And do everything from the copywriting to getting the books, copyright the books copyrighted and all of that. And then we help with the distribution of the book. So we've created our own distribution network. We also go to book fairs, help with translation of the books and selling the rights of the books. And now actually we're making our first foray into production. So hopefully somewhere after the summer, we should have our first few stories up as short films also.
Yeah, so being an acquiring editor at a publishing house is kind of a kitchen sink of everything, but you're ultimately, in a lot of ways, you're sort of like your own little publishing house within this larger group. It starts on the front end. You're going out and meeting lots of agents and telling them what kind of projects you want, to see. You're going to lunches, you're going to drinks, you're going to parties, meeting them, telling them the writers you want to do, and they're sending you submissions of their writers. From there, you have to work inside the publishing house to acquire those books, everything from, convincing your editorial colleagues that it's a worthy project, to actually sort of running the numbers to figure out how much you want to bid on that book. And once you acquire the book, there's obviously the kind of nuts and bolts of it, which is the actual editing process and editing the book. But from there, you're also kind of the representative of the book inside the publishing house. So you kind of take your vision from the book and you use that to help shape the cover, the copy, the way the book is marketed. You're selling the book to the sales force and letting them take it on the road. You're sort of, I guess, if the agent is kind of therapist, you're kind of, I don't know, the other half of that coin. You're kind of any issue the author might deal with, kind of you're the point person for that. So it really is a kind of, the job title is editor, but it's everything from kind of the business side of acquiring the projects to the kind of, more sort of broader side of actually selling these books and figuring out how to do that. So it is a really broad job in a lot of ways.
Yeah, thanks so much for that. I think when a lot of people hear about people who work in publishing, they might just assume that's like line editing. So thanks for showing all the other aspects of the job, including like acquisitions, agenting, and publishing and writing. So another question is, what was the best advice you received early on in a career, or what do you wish someone had told you when you were just starting out? And I think we can start with Sam this time.
Sure. I guess I think one thing that I always tell a lot of people who are interested in publishing is to really look widely at the industry. I think a lot of us are English majors and sort of, dream of being an editor, for whatever reason, whether you've sort of like, been raised on romantic stories of, of New York editors, whether you watched Younger and were really persuaded by that, whatever reason it is, like everybody wants to be an editor, but it is a really wide, fascinating industry in a lot of ways. There's agents, there's scouts, even within publishing houses. There's marketing, publicity, there's things you haven't even heard about. Like, I think one of the most interesting parts of publishing is subrights, which their job, they're almost like agents inside the publishing house, and they sell rights to books in foreign territories. And so, I really didn't consider that at all. I had 2 editorial internships. I started out being an editorial assistant. I spent 10 years doing that. But I think there's other really interesting parts of it. And I think it's worth really thinking about, what you might want to do, whether it's talking to people who work in those fields, whether it's, taking internships in different departments. I think it's a wide, fascinating field. And I think being sort of stuck on one part of it is something that, leads a lot of people to be an editorial assistant for a year, find out they hate it, and then, go get a consulting job or something.
This is a piece of life advice. It's not necessarily work related, although it did happen within my first week of the job, and it has stuck with me. And I don't think most of you, maybe some of you do want to be doctors and you're here just for listening, but so I give the caveat of that. My first boss said to me, I made a terrible mistake on something, which I thought was, going to be the end of my career. And he said, don't worry, but nobody's dying on the table. And I think about that day in, day out, at least once a week, when my job can feel completely overwhelming and nobody's dying on the table. It's book publishing. Don't take yourself so seriously. And it's just, for school, for classes, for all of that. I think I wish somebody had said that early on in my tenure in high school, but I certainly, heard it first when I was 22, and a week doesn't go by without my reminding myself of that.
So for me, it was that no experience, there's no experience that ever gets wasted. Somehow or the other, you end up using it through your life. So even if you end up taking a few, wrong roads or roads different than, they end up differently than you intended for them to end up, that experience never goes waste. And I've actually seen that in my life where everything has actually added up to something, even though for example, I told you my work experience in New York. But maybe that experience itself wasn't what I wanted to do, but I met some people who are actually I'm working with today, 15 years later. So it somehow just adds up somewhere. So no experience gets wasted was advice I got, and I've seen it really fall through. The second thing that I wish someone had told me when I was younger was that I'd end up doing everything that I wanted to do as a child. So my dream as a child was to start a publishing house. And this was what I wanted to do since I was in second grade. And somehow I'm here doing it, even though the path did not look like it's going to lead up to this originally. So you never know, that where, again, what I said right at the beginning, you don't know where life is going to end up. So if you know what you want to do, write it down, it might actually end up coming true.
Thank you all so much for the great advice. And for people who are listening today who do want to get into the industry or learn more about it, what kind of resources and skills would you recommend that we look into to get a better understanding, or people in the industry who you think we should follow?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big advocate for internships. They've gotten a lot better. When I was an intern at Norton in 2012, I had to figure out how to live in New York on $7.25 an hour, which the answer is to, get another part-time job and also spend your savings. So, it's kind of impossible, but the pay has gotten a lot better for those things. So, I do think internships are really great. I think they're what you make of them. I think if you just sit and do your work at the desk for 3 months, they're not going to do much. If you, spend those 3 months really talking to people and knocking on doors and trying to learn and meet as many people as you can, they're going to be really effective. A lot of people will talk about the publishing courses in New York, with like the NYU and Columbia. Those are great if you have $6,000 to spend on them. I didn't. And so I thought, if I could do this same thing and get paid to do it as an internship at the same time, I thought that was a better route, and it worked for me. But those courses work for a lot of people. But I think just doing what you can to kind of stay abreast of what's going on in the industry, whether it's just even like reading New York Times Book Review and things. When I was in college, I did not read contemporary fiction or things. I was obsessed with Virginia Woolf, and that kind of thing was all I wanted to do. And I had to kind of give myself a crash course and and kind of cloister myself in a room, after graduation with things like Jonathan Franzen to kind of be able to get through those publishing interviews. So I think reading widely and reading outside of classes and trying, if you can, to kind of at least be a little bit attuned to what's going on in the industry, I think is really helpful as well.
I completely agree. You want to figure out what you want to do, you have to do internships. I started interning when I was 15. I must have done about 11 internships before I actually joined the workforce. And every single one of them pays off because it actually teaches you what you don't want to do along with what you do want to do. It opens up the door. It opens up the doors to where you want to go, helps you network. The second is, again, I know I'm just agreeing with everything he said, is reading. I think like coming from publishing, you have to know the importance of reading. So, if you want to be a children's book author, then, read what Peter Reynolds has done, follow him. Julia Donaldson's put out a course out there, which hardly costs anything. You can do it. Go and get, I think there's a children's writer society, get their book, read it, go to a library, borrow it, read it. I think it's just like there's so much knowledge out there, but a lot of time I meet people who've just not done the basic work of actually going and reading the resources that are available to help you understand everything you actually need to know about the industry from a theoretical perspective at least. And the internship gives you that practical perspective, which if you marry the two, it's as good as doing a full-blown course on that also. I think the third thing I would say is go to meetups where their knowledge is being shared. There's so much, people are, continuously making the time to actually share the knowledge. Take that time to attend the webinar, take that time to go to that meetup that's happening around your, where you stay, and actually make that effort. Sometimes it's just literally making that effort for 5 minutes, which can change your life or open a door for you. And most often that's what people don't do. They just take it, like, oh, it's okay, I'll just hear the recording, or, I'll go another time, or will it be good? I want to watch my Netflix right now. So I think it's just that 5 minutes, the people who make that effort, I think those are the people who benefit from the difference that it makes. So as she said, her first job was out of college through a Northwestern Connect. Some of my best internships were through a Northwestern Connect. And I would just be like, hey, I'm an international student. I didn't get an opportunity to apply to most jobs. Do you think I can intern with you? And they always said yes. And, they would always say that you're the only one who wrote to us. So that's why they said yes to me. I'd be like, why didn't you interview me? Because nobody else wrote to them. So it's sometimes just that simple, being the person who reaches out. Pilar, if you want to.
I think you guys both kind of covered it all. I would suggest, if you go into an interview working at a commercial publishing house and you haven't read a book that was published after 1980, that's a problem. Look at the New York Times bestseller list, and a lot of it will not be things that you would choose to read for pleasure, but that's what's working. And so it's important that you go in understanding what's actually being published and working in the world, as opposed to the incredible knowledge that obviously you've gained through being an English major. And it helps you. Obviously, we've spent an hour talking about how important it is, but it's also important to understand what the current environment is like.
I just want to add one more thing. I think also thinking a little bit outside the box. If you think about your job the way everybody else is thinking about your job, you're going to end up competing with everybody. I think you have to go and acquire a skill or two that is complementary to what you want to do, which other people don't have or haven't thought through. So for example, if I'm in publishing today and I have data analytical skills, of course, I'm going to look at publishing in a very different way. Or if I have marketing skills, which are a little bit more sophisticated what the industry would have, I'm going to be, that is going to be my advantage. So whatever you're planning to do, make sure you have an ancillary skill with it, which is going to complement and make you stand out.
Yes, thank you so much. And to close out, if you have any remaining questions, feel free to circle back with Alumni with the questions that we couldn't get to. And I want to highlight what Makaya said in the chat, which is to take down the names of our amazing panelists here today. These people could connect you with countless resources. So if you have any more questions for them, don't hesitate to reach out. And we will share their contact info after as well. So thank you so much for logging on today, and please join me in thanking our alumni speakers for sharing such great insights with the group today, especially Priyanka. I love what you mentioned about the importance of mentorship and how it's a two-way street. So thank you all to the three of you for being so willing to share your expertise to all of us who are still just starting out in our careers. And keep an eye out for a follow-up email from Joseph with the Waldron Connections program.